Dmitry Orlov, 60 years old, a bricklayer by trade, was dismantling an old wall in the basement of the prestigious Voskhod Academy on that overcast May morning in 2024. The renovations were in full swing, and he was in a hurry to finish his part before the inspection team arrived. It was then that his crowbar unexpectedly went through the plaster with ease, revealing an empty space behind it. At first, Dmitry thought it was just an old ventilation shaft. But when he shone his phone's flashlight inside, Dmitry realized that he had discovered something far more disturbing. There lay backpacks and school uniforms covered in a thick layer of dust and cobwebs. What he found had been there for 29 years. The items were surprisingly well preserved, although covered in dirt. And most disturbingly, among the things was a yellowed photograph depicting 8 smiling faces, teenagers. This discovery would forever change a nearly 30-year-old mystery that had plagued the small town and the families whose children had disappeared without a trace. Dmitry had no idea that this ordinary morning would become the most unsettling day of his life. What was about to be discovered had remained hidden for many years, awaiting this moment. In a few minutes, a secret lasting almost 3 decades would finally be revealed. The town of Zarakai would never be the same after this discovery. It was a harsh, cold November in 1995 in Zarakai, a small town surrounded by dense forests and shrouded in mist. At the heart of this sleepy town stood the Voskhod Academy, a prestigious old boarding school known for its strict discipline and high academic standards. Its Gothic towers and dark, ivy-covered walls concealed many stories, but none as grim as the one that unfolded that cold autumn. Among the academy's students were 8 teenagers whose lives were intertwined by invisible threads of friendship and shared dreams. Among them was Anna Petrova, a quiet and thoughtful 16-year-old girl whose drawings were always filled with mysterious symbols. Next to her, you could often see Igor Sokolov, a 17-year-old leader whose confidence hid a deep sensitivity. There were also twins, Olga and Oleg Kozlov, 15 years old, inseparable and full of energy. Their laughter often echoed through the corridors. Maxim Ivanov, 16 years old, a talented athlete, always dreamed of a big career. Elena Smirnova, 15 years old, was the soul of the company. Her cheerfulness infected everyone around her. Sergei Novikov, 17 years old, was withdrawn but incredibly intelligent, always immersed in books. And finally, Katya Fedorova, 14 years old, the youngest of the group, whose naivety and curiosity made her everyone's favorite. They were ordinary teenagers with their hopes and anxieties. Their days were filled with lessons, extracurricular activities, and secret gatherings after lights out. Their routine was disrupted on November 25, 1995. After dinner, at around 11 p.m., when the academy was already silent, 8 students went for a walk. They often did this to avoid the strict supervision of the wardens. Usually, they returned before midnight, sneaking back into their rooms unnoticed. But that night, they did not return. Their absence was noticed only the next morning, during breakfast, when empty places at the table attracted the attention of the supervising teacher. Initially, the academy's director, the strict and unwavering Pyotr Nikolaevich Volkov, 49 years old, assumed that the students had run away. He was sure of it and insisted that they had simply left the school, unwilling to continue their studies. But a thorough search of their rooms showed that there were no signs of a hasty departure. Their personal belongings, including clothing, books, and even some money, remained untouched. Only small backpacks, which they usually took with them on walks, had disappeared. The local police began an investigation, but it was chaotic and fruitless. The forests around the academy were combed, the rivers and lakes surveyed, but no trace of the 8 students was found. The only clue was a vague message from the watchman, who claimed to have heard quiet voices and rustling near the back wall of the old library shortly before midnight. But this was considered insignificant. What was lost? 8 young lives whose dreams were cut short in an instant. Who was involved? The director, the teachers, the watchmen, and even the students themselves, whose secret adventure turned into tragedy. What questions remained unanswered? Where did they go? What happened to them? And why did no one see them leave? The mystery remained unsolved. Days, weeks, months, and then years passed. The secret disappearance of the 8 students from Voskhod Academy gradually faded into the background, turning into a local legend whispered in corners. For many, it became just another unsolved puzzle, part of Zarikai's dark history. But for the families of the missing teenagers, time stood still. Every day was filled with pain, expectation, uncertainty, and despair. They clung to any hope, any hint that their children might be alive. They refused to believe the worst. Director Volkov seemed to be unshaken. He continued to claim that the students had run away, that they simply could not cope with the demands of the academy. His words were cold and devoid of any sympathy. He insisted that the school was not responsible for their disappearance. Nevertheless, rumors of his involvement in what happened began to spread. People said that he was too calm, too confident in his version of events. Sometime later, Volkov retired, passing the reins of power to his successor, but his shadow continued to loom over the academy. In reality, the 8 students did not run away. That night, when they went on their secret walk, they were looking for something much more interesting than just an adventure outside the walls of the school. Anna Petrova, obsessed with old legends about the academy, found an ancient map hidden in one of the old books in the library. The map marked a secret passage leading from the library's basement to an old underground tunnel system that was rumored to have been used during the war. Anna convinced the others to join her in exploring this mysterious place. She said it would be an unforgettable adventure, their last farewell gesture before they went home for the winter holidays. They found the entrance. It was hidden behind a false wall at the very end of the library's basement, where old, dusty books that no one ever read were stored. They went inside full of curiosity and excitement, but as soon as they were in the tunnel, there was a loud bang behind them. The entrance closed. The students were trapped. Their laughter turned into panic. They tried to open the door, but it was locked from the outside and they could not move it. The air in the tunnel was heavy and stale, filled with the smell of dampness and something else, something more unpleasant. Igor Sokolov, as always, tried to remain calm, but even he could not hide his fear. Oleg Kozlov, always cheerful and carefree, began to cry. The students were scared. They spent several days in the tunnel trying to find a way out. Their supplies of food and water quickly ran out. With each passing hour, hope faded. They heard voices from above, but their cries for help were too weak to be heard from outside. What really happened? Director Volkov knew about the existence of the secret passage. He used it for his own purposes, to store forbidden books and documents that he did not want anyone to discover. When he found out that the students had found the passage, he panicked. He was afraid that they would discover his secrets. He made a terrible decision. Volkov ordered his loyal subordinates, including the old watchman Grigory Semenov, to brick up the entrance to the tunnel. He told them that it was an emergency hatch that needed to be sealed for safety. No one asked questions. Volkov's motives were selfish and ruthless. He was obsessed with the Academy's reputation and his own power. He could not allow anything to tarnish his impeccable image. He was willing to do anything to keep his secrets, and the students became just unwanted witnesses. He ordered that their disappearance be covered up, spreading rumors of an escape. He even forged several letters, supposedly written by the students, to convince families that their children were alive and safe. These letters were filled with general phrases and did not contain any personal details, which eventually aroused suspicion among some parents. The signs of concealment were obvious, if anyone wanted to see them. The strange haste with which Volkov closed the investigation, the lack of any real information, and the constant, persistent claims of escape. No one could imagine that such cold-blooded cruelty was behind it all. Years passed, and the mystery of the students' disappearance seemed buried under layers of time and oblivion. But the truth always finds its way. Its keeper turned out to be Ivan Kozlov, now an elderly man, 65 years old, a former maintenance worker at the Voskhod Academy. Ivan was a modest and inconspicuous man who worked at the school for almost 40 years. He was one of those who helped brick up the entrance to the secret tunnel on the orders of Director Volkov. He was there that night when the students disappeared. Ivan carried this secret like a heavy burden on his conscience for almost 3 decades. The guilt gnawed at him from within, depriving him of sleep and peace. Over the years, it only intensified, turning into unbearable pain. He saw the suffering of the families, knew that they deserved the truth, but fear of Volkov and his power always stopped him. He was afraid of losing his job, his reputation, perhaps even his life. Director Volkov was an influential man, and his connections extended far beyond the small town of Zarakai. But time spares no one. In 2023, when Ivan was already retired, he learned that Volkov had died of a heart attack. This news was both a shock and a relief to him. Volkov's death removed the shackles of fear from him. There was no longer anything that could prevent him from telling the truth. He was sick, his strength was fading, and he knew that he did not have much time left. Ivan wanted to cleanse his conscience before he died. He wanted the families of the missing students to finally know what really happened. Ivan did not immediately decide what to do. He considered his actions for several months, weighing all the pros and cons. In the end, he decided to write an anonymous letter to the local newspaper, hoping that it would draw attention to the long-forgotten case. In the letter, he indicated the exact location of the secret passage and hinted at the terrible truth hidden behind it. He did not reveal his identity, fearing possible consequences, even after Volkov's death, but his words were convincing enough to make journalists start an investigation. The newspaper, after receiving the letter, contacted the police. At first, they were skeptical, but the convincing details described in the letter forced them to act. The police contacted the new director of the Voskhod Academy and requested permission to examine the place indicated in the letter. That was when, in May of 2024, the renovation work began in the basement, which led to the incredible discovery. Ivan followed the news on television and in newspapers with excitement, waiting for the moment when his secret would be revealed. He knew that it would be difficult, but he also knew that it was right. He was prepared for the consequences, the anger, and the sorrow that would fall upon him and the academy, but he was sure that the families deserved the truth, no matter how bitter it was. The moment of truth came when Dmitry Orlov, a bricklayer, accidentally discovered the secret passage. News of this discovery quickly spread throughout Zarakai, attracting the attention of the police, journalists, and, of course, those who had been waiting for an answer all these years, the families of the 8 missing students. Upon arrival, the police found a narrow, dusty tunnel that led deep underground. The air in the tunnel was heavy, saturated with the smell of dampness and something else, something elusive but disturbing. The passage was wide enough for a person to walk through, but very low, which required bending over. After a few meters, it led to a small, dirty chamber. It was here that the remains of the 8 students were found. It was a terrible sight. Their bodies had decomposed, but the school uniforms and personal belongings found nearby left no doubt as to their identities. There were backpacks containing old textbooks, notebooks, several pencils, and yellowed photographs. Among them was the very photograph of the 8 smiling faces that Dmitry Orlov had discovered. Next to Anna Petrova's remains lay her sketchbook. It contained sketches of tunnels, some of which were very detailed, and on the last page, written in a trembling hand, were the words, "We are trapped. Volkov, he walled us in." This was irrefutable evidence of the former director's guilt. It was a complete and horrifying revelation that shocked everyone to the core. Forensic examination confirmed that the students died of dehydration and starvation. They were trapped in the tunnel until they died. It was a slow and agonizing death. The authorities arrested Grigory Semenov, the old watchman who had helped Volkov brick up the passage. Semenov, already frail and ill, did not deny his involvement. He confessed to everything, confirming the version of events described in the anonymous letter. He recounted how Volkov had convinced him that the students had run away and that they had to brick up the emergency hatch to prevent further incidents. He said that Volkov had been very convincing. He said that he had been young and naive and that he had simply been following orders. Semenov said that he regretted what he had done. The reaction to this shocking revelation was immediate and vehement. The news spread like wildfire, causing a wave of outrage and grief across the country. The parents of the missing students, who had clung to a glimmer of hope all these years, were devastated. Their grief was unbearable, but at the same time, there was relief that the truth had finally been revealed. They knew that their children had not run away. They had been murdered. The consequences of this shocking revelation were enormous. The public demanded justice. Grigory Semenov was brought to trial, despite his remorse and advanced age. The court found him guilty of complicity in the concealment of a crime. He was sentenced to several years in prison, but his health was so deteriorated that he died in a prison hospital a few months after the sentence. Director Volkov escaped justice in this life, but his reputation was forever ruined. His name became a symbol of betrayal and cold-bloodedness. The Voskhod Academy faced a wave of outrage and distrust. Its reputation was hopelessly tarnished. Parents began to withdraw their children from the school en masse. In the end, the academy was closed. The building, once proud and prestigious, now stood empty and abandoned, a reminder of the dark secret it had concealed. The authorities conducted a full investigation into Volkov's activities, uncovering numerous cases of corruption and abuse of power that he had committed over the years. The remains of the 8 students were returned to their families. Touching funerals were organized, which attracted the attention of the entire country. It was a moment of grief, but also a moment of unity for the families who had waited so long for the opportunity to bury their children. Finally, they were able to say goodbye. A memorial was erected on the site of the academy in memory of the missing students. It was a large stone monument with the names of all 8 engraved on it. Every year, on the anniversary of their disappearance, people gathered here to honor their memory and remind the world of what happened. Zarakai, once a sleepy town, was shaken to the core. Residents could not recover for a long time after realizing that such a terrible tragedy had occurred right under their noses. Trust in local authorities and the education system was undermined. Many wondered, how could this have happened, and why didn't anyone notice it earlier? The city authorities decided to create a special commission to investigate all cases of missing people in the region over the past decades. This was done to ensure that no similar tragedy would go unnoticed. The story of the 8 students from Voskhod Academy became a lesson for everyone. A lesson that silence can be deadly. A lesson that the truth always comes to the surface, no matter how deep it has been buried, and a lesson that even the most prestigious institutions can hide the darkest secrets. Years later, after the shocking revelation, Zarakai was slowly but surely recovering. The pain of loss remained, but it was mixed with the determination not to let anything like this happen again. The families of the survivors were gone, but their memory lived on in every corner of Zarakai. The memorial became a place of pilgrimage, where people came from all over the country to honor the memory of the victims and reflect on the fragility of human life. This story became a reminder that institutional power, if left unchecked, can become dangerous. It showed how corruption and the desire to protect a reputation can lead to terrible consequences. The story of the 8 students from Voskhod Academy became a dark but important lesson. It highlighted the importance of truth, the need to fight for it even when it seems that all is lost, and it reminded everyone that even in the darkest stories, there is always room for hope. Hope for justice, hope for redemption, and hope that the lessons of the past will not be forgotten. What do you think about this story? Write in the comments.